Kathy. What I'd like to do now is start down under our agenda here. We'll start with 5 and 6, the administrative duties first, all right? Do a payroll for Kathy in the amount of $197.40. Is there a motion to accept it?
I make a motion we accept the payroll for Kathy as written.
Motion made, second. Second, thank you. Any questions? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Send it around. If you would, as that's going on, turn to your minutes page in the booklet. And we'll do the minutes of February 25th and February 14th.
14th is just you and Derick, because that's the one that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
But yeah,
but
that'll be
I
fine.
kind of just did a little summary
That's
of
fine,
what
Kathy,
went on.
thank you. Yeah.
But I figured the other board members would like to see what kind of went on.
Is Michael Burrell out there?
Went to the bathroom.
Okay, thank you, Brian.
It is recorded.
Yeah, okay. Mike, don't leave the room with the camera on.
Oh, I had to go to the
I've asked you that before, and don't do it again, please, thank you. Derick, we're doing the minutes. Once you get that signed, appreciate it, then we'll go right to the minutes in the blue folder on the left-hand side.
We have no choice, she's making us share again.
You were gonna learn to share.
It'll be a total lesson.
There's not enough room on that end. Plus I only had 4 of one and 5 of the other, so I figured well.
We got
Share.
our eyes on you.
Just share.
We got our eyes on you.
I don't share well either, so.
Big whoop.
Do you know one of the guys from the Bay guy?
No.
Never.
Oh,
Gustafson.
who?
Jim Gustafson.
I heard someone did, but I didn't.
What's that?
Over in Nelson. At the camp, oh, he passed away at a
Oh.
lot, right out of babysitting.
That's too bad.
Did he include a signature page?
Yeah, no, really.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you like that?
Carter?
Pretty,
We'll go over that,
extensive.
so we'll
Yeah.
go over that after.
I haven't even looked at
That's
it.
all right, that's all right.
I haven't had time today. We can even come in until 11 today.
You
That
find the
was
minutes, Derek? 14th and the 25th, please.
14 is just for you two.
Yeah, the 14th is just the 3 of us when we met with the select people.
Yeah, you better be careful, you might be out of a job.
Uh,
Kidding, I'm kidding.
I've been trying, I've really been trying. Just-
We'll have him fill in 2 hours a week on his own so he can do decisions.
Yeah,
You like it?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to read this, Mr. Ramsey.
This,
That's pretty inclusive.
We'll have to decide when to put them back on the agenda
Can
to
we
workshop.
have this section where I say about my comment about being comfortable?
Oh, for sure. Do you wanna add it?
Yeah.
You can write anything in you want?
yeah, you can, add anything you want.
On the, meeting? Derick wants to add? He'll get together with you?
Okay, write it on and I'll have it for the next meeting. We can sign it then.
Okay.
We'll table it for tonight.
So on the 14th, February 14th, we'll hold it and
Yeah,
then
we'll table that one, yep, okay, fine.
How about the 25th, folks? Everybody have an opportunity to review?
Yeah.
All were present for that
Yeah.
one.
Derick's still looking, that's fine.
I hope that's not gonna go on all night.
It is, man. I'm exhausted. I could go s-
No, I saw your face,
sleep
it's like,
right
oh,
here.
I heard it. It was like-
I can sleep right here. Been moving snow all day, I'm tired.
Hey, I even shoveled the sidewalk. Okay. I don't know. Not this year anyway. Prior years. And I did it with my sciatica.
Not easy not being young.
Tell me about it.
This was the decision.
Yeah,
Wow.
I know, nice, huh? I haven't had it really a chance to read it all, I scanned it real quick.
Now you know what I was saying, huh?
Yeah, I know. I was like, I can't wait to really get into it, because it looks like it's set up like mine.
We'll be able to take it and review it.
Yes.
Make highlights
Pretty
to it.
thorough.
Yeah, I figured review it, scratch out,
Oh, good.
add
Good.
on.
All right, on the minutes, excuse me, on the minutes of the 25th, please. Is there a motion to accept?
Make a motion, we accept the minutes of February 25th as written.
Motion made as written, second.
Second, Mr. Chairman.
Motion made second. Any other questions, any corrections that anybody sees needed? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, aye.
I was in Spanish.
Aye.
More words in Spanish.
So you Nate will stand by with. But I do have
Portuguese next in.
two from abutting towns, information from abutting towns. Do that, if we still got time, and Jeff Graves, Jeff Walsh is on his way. From the town of Ware Planning Board. They'll be holding a meeting on Wednesday, the 20th, 7:30. In reference to the applicant, MRL LLC and Cedar Roots. Now seeking a special permit site plan approval for cannabis cultivation and manufacturing, 50 East Main Street, under Chapter 48. Anybody wishes to attend, it'll be there. Again, on March 20th. Then a public hearing notice also, again from the town of Ware. Wednesday, March 20th, same date, this is at 7:10. The applicant of 15 South Street LLC to amend the Ware zoning map and bylaw by changing 4 parcels from downtown commercial district to the mill yard. This is gonna be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Under there's bylaw sections 317 and 318, the zoning bylaw. They want to change it. They want to change it into the mill yard. It looks like they want to put in, well, they want to put in other buildings and other businesses into the mill yard instead of having it in the downtown commercial district. They want to move it out and put it into the new mill yard.
I wonder if it's across the street.
I'm sorry.
I wonder if it's like across the street. I'm trying to picture.
I'm trying to think, I think it
Building
is.
right on the same side when you come up to the lights on the right. Isn't
Commercial
It's
building,
like,
yeah.
right there, yeah.
Yeah, corner.
That'll be interesting. So that's on the 20th, also at 7:10. Those are the only two. Alrighty.
The next meeting, that next week, what's that gonna be?
The 11th?
Yeah.
Cutler Road.
Cover, okay, cause I've got a couple things written in there, crossed off and then added again.
You have a report just received today,
Yep.
so you can look at it right now, go ahead, because part of it is in reference to tonight. It's from Jeff Walsh at Graves, in reference to the special permit and ZBT Coy Hill area. Jeff should be here, or he said he will be here. Assuming he has references, if you want to take a look at it. Oh, the state one.
Ooh, a red stapler too. You ever see the movie?
Oh,
The red stapler?
What's he want to state deal, some copper? Some copper too?
Yeah, I didn't have time for that.
We got copies.
The way you cover yourself, Kathy.
I'm so- Not enough hours in the day.
Okay. Has this been in mind for a while?
Yes,
Is that what?
that's another thing I meant to bring up, because they sent another email, if anybody's gonna go to any of those
Yeah.
classes.
I would.
Let me know what ones, if anybody else wants to go.
All on the same day.
I think so.
Yeah, this is the
Yeah, annual.
annual, the luncheon and stuff, right?
I've never gone. So, well, you have to pick what one you wanna go to. I think you have to pick a couple.
Well, this has changed. Okay. Okay.
Can I have that back again? I didn't realize there were two of these things here.
Okay.
That blow up? Here, Sherry. You started this.
Dario.
I've got some fun.
right, what I'd like to do at 7:30 at this time. It's the continuation for the public hearing of special permit 28485, site plan 5253 for ZBT Energy, Coy Hill Road. So, the rest of the board, go right ahead.
You ready?
I'm ready, yeah.
Okay.
Evening. Again, my name's Ernie. I'm with ZBT, the applicant, and Dan Delaney is with me as well tonight from Fuss and O'Neill. So, last meeting we were at was, I believe, in end of January. We went through the site plan, went through an overview, kind of walked through what the site is, where it is, the different components of the site. We talked a little bit about the drainage, the stormwater, some of the phasing, kind of had an overview discussion. So I can go back through anything specifically if the board would like me to touch on anything again that we discussed at the previous meeting. But I thought tonight really the emphasis at the last meeting was on the stormwater and drainage review that was going to be sent out to Graves Engineering, which we received a copy of that letter today, earlier, so it's dated March 4th. And what I was planning to do was just go down it right now and fill in any blanks, answer some of the questions, go over the comments that Jeff had with GEI. There was only 11 comments, so if that's okay, I'll just walk right through each one of those and we can
Jeff's here.
have the discussion. Perfect timing.
Okay.
All right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so the first one is talking about rules and regulations for site plan approval. If any earth material is to be removed from the site, we had, Graves has the engineer identify the volume of what's being left on the, removed from the site. So the way this is designed, and our goal for every solar project is to make sure that it's balanced as far as the cut and fill. So there's no extra earth to be brought in aside from gravel to build the roads, and there's no substantial amount of fill or earth to be removed from the site. So that's why that's not identified there. So that's number one. Number two is that Graves just stating that they don't review the electrical components for the project, and that's beyond the scope. So I believe we submitted some information on the panels, the racking, the electrical components associated with the project, and I think Graves is just stating that they're not looking at that. That's all that comment was there for. Comment number three is in regards to glare, and the glare analysis, again, Graves stating that that's beyond the scope of what they're reviewing here. So just to touch a little bit on the glare, we didn't submit any specific glare analysis for this project. Really, glare with solar arrays is actually, it's pretty minimal. The panels are designed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. So there's not that's why you see panels near the highway, you see them at airports. There's not a huge risk when it comes to glare and the site impacts that glare can have from sun reflecting off a panel and potentially impacting somebody's home. What I will say is any glare that there is a potential for would be angled to the south, because that's the direction that the panels are angled at. And it really would need to affect something that's really close. It's not going to shine through hundreds of feet of wood. So, we don't think there's a huge risk here for glare being an impact, given how the panels work, what they do with the sunlight, and the location of the site is very secluded. There's no one that's really near the site that could potentially be impacted by glare. So that's why nothing was submitted there for that. Number four is Graves just saying that the planning board, we understand the planning board will address comments relative to proof of liability insurance and financial surety. So I had brought with me what we've submitted in other towns, just a copy of our proof of liability insurance for the EPC company that will be doing the construction work, and also that document it's a form of what the bond for the financial surety will be. That's a form of a bond we use with Hanover Insurance on a number of projects we developed and are built and operational right now under the SREC program. So that's our intent, and we can get the decommissioning comment about decommissioning comes a little later here. It's comment number 9, but we can talk a little bit more about that process, how we've been doing it, and if the board has any recommendations. But that's the form, if the board would like to review, of the bond that we've been using with Hanover Insurance that, you know, we would intend to use here as well for the decommissioning surety. Number 5 is regarding the setbacks here. So Mr. Walsh has stated the required setbacks for the solar facilities are 100 feet. And the plans proposed on the northerly limit, the structures are approximately 40 feet from the northern property line. So looking at the current bylaws right now, yes, that's the case. We obviously know that there's questions as to which we believe that when this project was designed and what we were designing the project to falls under the previous bylaws where the building setbacks were less, and that's what this project has been designed to. So that's the rationale there. I'm sure Mr. Walsh probably wasn't aware that that's going on, but basically what's happening is we designed this a year ago before we started working with the Conservation Commission, using the setbacks that were in place under the previous bylaw. We believe, you know, we're protected under that bylaw. Obviously, that's the cause of, you know, some court cases right now. But just keep in mind, this limit of work has been approved through the Conservation Commission. And, you know, the point of the building setbacks here, again, it's fairly secluded, it's in the woods. You know, the difference between 40 feet from a property line and 100 feet from a property line when it comes to a structure is not really gonna impact anybody on this northern side because the closest residence is, you know, 1,000 plus feet away, so that's some color when it comes to that comment. I know it's probably not gonna get answered right now today, but if the board requires us to apply for variances for that, we can figure out the solution there, but that's, you know, our justification as to why this site has been laid out this way.
When did we get the plans? After the bylaw change?
The submission to the planning board, yes, was after, but the protection is dated from the date of the submission of a A&R plan or a subdivision. So that date is the date that, you know, is in question right now. It was, ZPT maintains that we submitted what freezes our zoning prior to the change of the zoning ordinance here in town. And so, you know, for that, we believe that we're frozen into the previous version of the bylaws, which this project was designed to. And we would have liked to have been able to submit these plans, you know, honestly, that was something we had requested back in May of last year, was we wanted to submit these plans at that same time when we were going through the process with the Conservation Commission. That's typical of how we do work in every other town here in Massachusetts. We like to submit at the same time. That way changes that happen through the Conservation Commission can be addressed while we still have the public hearing open with the planning board. So we don't have to get a meeting closed and go back and continue to change. But, you know, we weren't allowed to do that. It was made clear that the planning board required us to go through the process with the Conservation Commission first. That took a lengthy amount of time, which is, you know, now why we're talking about this a year later, so.
I think that's a question for legal counsel.
Yep, I agree.
Because if it was submitted after our zoning change, because they weren't on the agenda. So that's something that we'll have to talk with legal counsel over that one. Do you have any comments about that?
I agree.
Okay, continue.
Okay. Number 6 and 7, so these comments are about the hydrology and the stormwater. Dan, if I could just tag you in here just to speak to those. I believe it's something that's been addressed, but I'll just let Dan touch on that really quick before we get back into it.
Sure, we appreciate Jeff getting the review quick enough where we could take a look at those 2 items. So what we noticed was in the very end of the Concom process, we made some tweaks to the basins to raise them up to get further separation from groundwater. And at the time, we only submitted the revised calculations, not a full stormwater report. So the plans were changed and submitted, and the calculations, the proposed calculations were submitted to Concom at the time. So when we went to reprint the report for the submission to you folks, we were one iteration behind on the proposed calculations. So I have a copy of them here. I also emailed them to both Jeff and Kathy a couple hours ago. We realized what the discrepancy was. So the plans are correct, the grading on the plans are correct, and the outlet structure that's noted in comment 7 is correct based on these calculations, which I'll hand to the board now. Like I said, I did email them to Jeff and to Kathy a couple hours ago. So that would replace that appendix in the report. So the plans, there's no change to the plan. The plans that were submitted, it was an error on our part, so that
Yeah.
check does it.
What's your comment on this?
Good evening, everybody. For the record, my name is Jeff Walsh with Graves Engineering, peer review consultant for the planning board. I have not seen those. I know my letter came out latter part of the afternoon, so I certainly would take a look at what was resubmitted. What I'm hearing, the explanation I'm hearing makes sense to me.
Yeah.
And I'd be glad to confirm, if I can't do so tonight, that the calculations are in fact brought up to be current with the set of plans before you.
Okay.
And just to be clear, so our plan is, our intention is to submit a whole revised response letter to this with breaking those down. So, we didn't expect him to look at that before the meeting tonight or have an answer,
Right.
but we will get him, the information that is being asked for here that kind of clarifies those two comments, so. Number 8 is general engineering comments. It just says Graves has no issues. Number 9 is the decommissioning plan. So Graves points out that it's incomplete as submitted, it's missing the cost estimate, and that item 14 needs to include a note saying the disassembly of the panels will be done at off-site facility. So the plan that we had submitted, the way we've been doing it, and we're open to switching that up, but the way we've been doing it here, that decommissioning plan that you received is kind of an overview as to what happens through the decommissioning plan. But what we've been doing as far as the estimate is closing these hearings with the condition that a decommissioning bond has to be approved by the town and issued prior to construction. That's a condition that's pretty typical we've been getting in towns that have special permits. And then following, getting approval, we submit a full decommissioning report that has the scope in it. It addresses that comment about the disassembly of, where the disassembly of the panels happens. It walks you through the entire scope, the steps of everything from going in there, removing all the electrical, all the panels, earthwork, restoration. It has the full scope, and it uses an appendix in the back with a table that breaks down the actual cost estimate for that work, which the bond is then based on. So that has a section that gets reviewed. It hasn't typically been something that's a public hearing. Normally the board just takes it and we submit it after they review it. We can show up to answer any questions if that's requested of us, but it's something that the board reviews, sometimes sends out for review, and we come to an agreement and get that signed off and issue the bond in that amount prior to construction. So what you have for the decommissioning plan is not the full scope, and does, we acknowledge that it does not have an estimate in it. What we've been doing is normally closing these hearings with a condition and moving forward with that once the hearing's closed. So I know we likely are, gonna continue again tonight. We can submit that probably this week if the board would like. We can put that estimate together and submit it, and maybe we can have that, signed off even before the next meeting or at the next meeting while the hearing is still closed. We're fine with doing it either way.
Jeff, is that acceptable?
Well, it depends on when the board would want to talk about the value of surety. The things I look at is, first of all, this is looking to decommissioning a facility some number of years out. So I look to make sure that inflation is in there. We've seen a few applications and other communities come in without inflation applied. We're talking about 2.5%, 3% a year.
Mhm.
2.5% seems to be about the norm right now. So I'll be looking at, the cost, the way they came about it in today's dollars, and also how they project it forward. And different towns deal with different ways as to when they're gonna revisit the value, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years out and so forth, but there's not a lot of experience with decommissioning these things yet, because these are new facilities. So we're trying to do the best we can with our information. And yes, there is some salvage value. What's the salvage value gonna be 20, 25 years out? I don't know. There's a lot of these facilities being decommissioned. Supply and demand tells me maybe the salvage value then might not be the same as the salvage value today, even when accounting for inflation. But you almost have to use a crystal ball to some extent.
Okay.
I try to make sure that the cost estimates seem to be reasonable in today's dollars, and then apply the inflation factor, if you will. With respect to that one item had to do with basically disassembling the panels that come normally shipped to the facility that are already intact. It talks to using a chemical, I believe it was a mild acid or something like that. It's just not something you do out in the field. I'd rather see, that's why I'd rather, those things, if it's gonna be done and if that's normal for recycling, I don't have a problem with it. It's just not appropriate to be doing it on a construction job. That's the point I'm trying to make with that disassembly thing.
All right. Do you have any questions? Melissa?
I think we've always required this to be in place before we
I thought so.
close in the past. I'm trying to remember, but I'm pretty sure
We did
have.
with Veronica.
Yeah.
That's fine, we can
Yeah.
submit it to the board, or to the board and Graves as
And
well.
Graves, yeah.
And we can have it ready in, a couple of days, so hopefully that review can happen, and, we can have any revisions or comments before the next, so hopefully we can address it, and have it ready for approval at the next hearing, so we're happy to submit that.
Okay. Bob?
I have nothing, Madam Chairman.
Derick?
Jeff, remember we were talking about those reports for construction, and we can ask for a copy?
Oh, yes. Those would be the reports that go along with the stormwater pollution prevention plans. Is that the report we talked about? Yeah. The point is, this board certainly could condition that if you want to monitor construction to some extent, and I'd strongly urge the board to keep that discretion and allow that to occur. I mean, to be fair to an applicant, if you ask them for copies of the reports associated with the stormwater pollution prevention plan and the NPDES filing, in theory, they're already generating that paperwork, so it means a photocopy, that's good. The point is, when you have that condition in place, if things aren't going right out on the site, it gives this board the latitude to be able to go out there and actually step in if necessary. And so I agree with you, Derick. I think that would be a good condition.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right. So the next hearing isn't until 8:30? No one else has any questions, we'll just continue this until we need the date. Yeah. So the reports and everything are ready, and Jeff has everything. Oh.
May I speak to item number
Yeah.
5? That
Yeah.
has to do with the setback.
Yes,
As an engineer, I can only give you so much advice and talk to you about my experience, but this, to me, if you need a definite answer, you might want to seek the advice of counsel.
yeah, that's what I had said, was we were gonna get in touch with legal counsel on that
Okay.
one.
Okay.
Because I think these plans weren't submitted to us until after the new bylaw went into effect.
That's what I saw as well. And-
Right.
Yeah. And, so, to the best of my knowledge, and I can't say for fact, But if a filing were made with a different town body, that's, you know, that, to me, that doesn't trigger jurisdiction under the planning board, or,
No.
but that's just my opinion.
We're two separate.
Yep, agreed.
What do you say we do with the other hearing? It's not for an hour.
We can't see it until 8:30.
Okay.
Excuse me.
Yes.
So could I just, I just wanna be clear about when we're continued to, when the next hearing is. If we could be continued in the next hearing, we have a date to go to.
It's when we can. We've
be
got so
announced.
many, yeah. To be announced, we'll contact you and let you know. Because it has to be after Jeff has time to go over all the paperwork and the plans and stuff, and get back to us. And for us to talk to legal counsel, that takes us sometimes a while.
Would it be okay to be continued to the next available hearing, and if the things aren't in place at that point, we can continue, but I know I can get Graves what I've spoke to tonight, you know,
Yeah.
probably before the end of this week, so if the next meeting's, you know, 2 or 3 weeks away, I think that's enough time, hopefully for us. I know the board has to do their piece as well, but if we could put a definitive date, that would help out a lot for us on our end, and if the things aren't in place at that time, we can always continue.
Okay, we'll have to,
About the 18th, 25th, it depends how long Jeff, it's good for you.
and lawyer.
I can usually turn things around in a week and a half to 2 weeks.
25th?
25th.
That would be the quickest.
25th?
Yeah. Because that gives us time to get legal counsel.
That's gonna be the slow part.
Mhm. Is there a motion to continue the hearing on ZPT special permit 284 and 285, site plan number 52 and 53 to March 25th at 7:30? Kathy? 7:30? Okay. Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion that we continue the special permit 3435 and site plan 5253 to March 25th.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any abstention?
Thank you.
You got to share.
We have to.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that we put them apart.
That's her.
Did I send you on the agenda?
That was me.
I mean, on the
Meridian.
posting?
I joined.
It's coming together.
City man.
Okay.
You grabbed it, right?
Who is doing Bragg Road?
Nice to meet you, by the way.
Okay.
Nice to meet you.
Anar.
Will do.
Appreciate that.
And you did get the note that you checked it out.
Yes, we've been trying to talk with legal counsel too, or town
And I've
counsel
been
too.
trying to,
Yeah,
too.
so
Yeah. I keep
it's just
getting-
better for us to hold on to them until
Yes,
it's straightened out.
because I just have so many, I don't want to lose them on you.
Yeah.
My office is crazy because there's 3 offices in that one office. So
Yeah. No, we were
That's the
told.
problem.
Yeah, we were told by council, so we'll just get straightened out.
All right, with that,
So Adam, who's the other guy who's speaking?
So that's Ernie, he's with
Yeah.
0 Point.
Oh, okay.
if you want,
ZPT.
why don't we move on with the
Yeah, a year ago I left already.
decision
Oh, what come up?
that Carter wrote, if you'd like to take a look at that for a couple minutes, I don't know.
Stand for a minute.
Other than that,
Did you hear about that?
does any board member have any comments or concerns referenced last week, or any comments reference information obtained from legal counsel, or
Just still waiting.
comments referenced in CARFA?
waiting to hear from legal counsel.
Yeah,
on what's
Becky
going
wasn't
on.
here today to get any answers, and as of Thursday, there was no answer.
Why are we waiting for Becky?
Well, someone has the hotline. I don't know if someone wants to use that hotline.
Remember when we talked about having that special detail for drainage system?
Yeah, I brought it up with Bob, and go ahead and discuss it right now with Sue and Melissa here, so they can be on the same page. Go ahead.
So in the office, we kind of put together what would be the most beneficial drainage system for, especially
I just
for
forgot to do that. Then when they come back.
big slope sites. And the idea was to us have like a details already to condition everybody who comes and say, if your site has more than 3% of slope, this is what we want you to use. So, we were talking about that last week after, it's a mix of what Borrego called the drip edge interceptor trench.
Which that was conservation that,
Well, they kind of
Prompted
like
that
drive
with
them that
Borrego?
way. What I want is to have, like, the board have those details on how we would like to have those every time a project has a big slope. In other case, we're protecting, telling them this is what we want you to do before you do anything.
Yeah.
And we say we could, touch base with Jeff and, have him check out. And that way, the board and the town will be some sort of more protected against any other one that comes in and just wants to throw a big farm and we don't, I still don't see, this could potentially, affect the town. Nature, like Jeff said the other day, nature, you can't predict, it could be anything. So I had a couple engineers trying to really think about it, being very creative and modern and realistic. What would be the best system to that? So if we have those kind of details, I think it would be very
when they
beneficial.
apply, like, you're thinking when they apply, like, this is,
When they apply, have it at, front end, if your site has more than 3% of slope, this is what we want to see.
Have it incorporated into our,
I'd be interested if Jeff has seen that with other what I struggle with is he's done his peer review and conservation did their review, so for us.
we can't change it now, we just, new projects
New
come
ones,
in,
okay.
have rules that get handed out when they have their, come in to get their,
Order that in place
special
right now.
permit.
Yeah, it's like an order of condition, but
Yeah,
they say,
we're the planning board, I don't see why we can't ask them to build them this way.
It's kind of hard after they submit their plans.
well, but if they end up changing the setbacks, for example, then that's what we can.
Then that would
Because
be
it's
a
gonna
big-
change, and
Yeah.
actually it's gonna make the pond smaller, because the system is more efficient, keeping all the water inside the site, instead of putting it on a corner and letting it go. So I think it's a win-win for both ends.
Jeff, have you seen other towns, we were talking about the intercept trenches that were done on the,
Drip edge.
It's kinda like,
interceptor.
Jeff, what I'm trying to
The
do
rest.
is, come up with a system where when we have a project like this where the slope is bigger than 3 or 5%,
Okay.
have it before in hand and say if your site is more than 5% of slope, this is what we want to see. And we can see it in Borrego, they did it 90 degrees on the other side, but
Yeah,
have something like that, but that follows the topo line. I can show you the details
okay.
later, but the idea is to have, that we could have something that if a project with these conditions, this is what we want to see.
Okay. And this is to try to infiltrate water back into the ground, is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes, so the ponds get smaller.
To try to get, more of the water to drain on the system rather than to a pond where it's let out into the
Sure.
environment.
Okay. When we first started seeing solar projects, we were concerned, I'm gonna give you kind of a long answer to the drip trenches and the infiltration, but early on, we were concerned about erosion where the water comes off the panels. And case in point, I think it was in East Brookfield in a gravel pit. It's like, what's gonna go on? It was pretty flat, but it was open sand. It wasn't even, hadn't even been stabilized, because when gravel removal was occurring, all the topsoil was gone, so there was nothing to stabilize it with. long story short, it was a big issue. And that was a number of years ago. And since then, I've been going out to quite a few solar projects and taking a good hard look at the drip line after the grasses are growing. It's not the problem we were concerned about years and years ago. The water's basically coming off, hitting the ground, and it's not generally not causing any significant erosion, which has been a good thing. Now, let's talk about using those trenches for infiltration. I like the idea, but I'm also concerned that creating a wider trench, even if they use the narrow bucket, say a 1-foot bucket, and created a trench, and if it's got any slope at all, that's going to be the path of least resistance for the water, and it could actually end up causing more erosion. Trying to infiltrate the water into a trench, unless it's perfectly level, the water could start flowing, and it could end up being more of a problem than less of a problem. I had heard a story from an engineer, I don't remember who it was or where the site was. I've never seen the site, but they actually encountered a similar, an erosion kind of problem by trying to use a trench just for the purpose of making the water hit the ground and not cause erosion. It actually, the trench was on a gradient somewhere, so the water that would have flowed away in a certain direction was forced to follow the path of least resistance, which was along the stone trench, and they had trouble with it. So my advice is, let's be careful. I like the intent. I'm just not sure if it's going to work as good as we're hoping. The biggest change is that if you have a site, and if it's a hayfield and they convert it to solar panels, pre-developed, and let's say the grading, they basically don't change the grading. Going from grass to grass with about the same slopes, in the hydrology modeling that we do, the rates of runoff and the volumes of runoff don't change. So to that extent, it's just the fact that going from grass to grass, you just want to grade it so that, well, no significant changes in grading, you want to let the water go wherever it went before. Where you see the stormwater basins is where you go from something, a solar project going to be finished in grass, and it's not going to be maintained like a lawn where it's short, it's going to be longer like a pasture. So from hydrology modeling, that provides a little more infiltration in itself than the lawns. But when you go from woods to grass, that changed. The woods tend to abstract or take rainfall and absorb it through the plants and in the leaf litter and so forth, more so than lawns. So it means pre-development with woods, the peak rates of runoff and volumes of runoff are lower, and when you cover it with grass, they go up. So what we're seeing is usually the stormwater basins. And if it's in the till soils that we often see, such as Coy Hill Road, even Reed Street, Sincarthus project, Scottish Meadow, these are all tills. You're not going to get a lot of infiltration, so it's going to be a lot of money spent to get just a little bit of change and a little bit of infiltration. And you might get some pushback from the contractors, because it's easier for them to go out and excavate out a bigger basin and stabilize it with grass and put an outlet control structure than to put thousands or tens of thousands of feet of trench in and fill it with stone, because they have to buy labor intensive, machine intensive to dig that trench, because they can't dig it before the solar panels go in, because you don't know exactly where the drip lines are going to be. So once the solar panels are there, then you know where the drip lines are going to be, and then you can't. It's almost impossible to work a machine under the solar panels, plus the cost of the stone, and it's going to be a lot of labor to bring it in. So I like the idea, the intention. Maybe we can come up with another way to do it besides stone trenches.
So by hearing what you said, you really encouraged to do some ground testing to find out what kind of
soils.
absorptions we have to start with on the field.
That would be helpful. That'd be, we can usually, as engineers, we can get a general understanding by looking at the soils maps that are put out by the NRCS, Natural Conservation. I should know this off the top of my head. Anyways, they're put out by the federal government or an agency of the federal government. They map soils throughout New England, throughout the United States. And that's what we rely on as the first cut.
See, where I'm concerned, I'm gonna put Coy Hill as an example. When I started on the board, I got, hey, if you wanna see trees cut, go to Coy Hill, they're cutting all the trees. And I did. I went to check out, I went all the way up, and I said, oh yeah, they're cutting a lot of trees.
Okay.
2 years later, or a year later, I went back, and the road down the hill is a disaster. It's wet. Even in a sunny day, the road is wet.
Okay.
So I can think that there's a effect.
Okay.
You know, I'm not for sure. I'm just assuming that because of all these acres of woods are gone, now we're getting a lot of wet areas down below. And the asphalt is in pretty bad shape since I went a year ago.
Okay, and that's at the Coy Hill Road site that we just spoke about a few minutes ago?
It's there and all the way up the hill, Jeff.
Okay, but I just,
From Reynolds Road all the way to the back end of the property of West Brookfield.
I can see our highway department trying to repair all that road.
Okay.
You know, within a year, it got destroyed.
okay.
And if you go on a sunny day, you'll see the road is wet.
Yeah. Coy Hill Road, I visited, this board got an application by another applicant, I thought, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I forget when. And I walked that site. And when I come off of Coy Hill Road and I went down the Farmers Road.
You went
it
down
goes
the back
way
way,
down
West
the hill.
Brookfield, which is Cutler Road.
Cutler Road.
If it comes up to, you went down to Route 9.
Oh, no, I think we're talking about 2 different projects. The Coy Hill Road project, that one right there?
That's across from Reynolds Road, a third of the way up.
Yeah.
That project right there.
Yeah, that's the one I walked a few years ago.
Okay.
The Coy Hill Road in West Brookfield,
Yep.
I walked that this fall,
Mhm.
and that's the one that's got road coming in from both towns and,
From West Brookfield,
Yep.
Route 9, up
Yep.
to the top of the hill.
yep,
Which
yep,
would be the Warren line.
okay.
You went down, it's a cart path.
Right, I got to the car path, I
Yeah.
turned around,
Yeah.
I came down by,
Came back down around town,
And came
down
up-
9, and you came up Cutler Road,
That's
Beaman
correct.
Road to Cutler.
that's correct,
Yep.
that's correct. I just wanted to make sure that we were talking about the same Coy Hill Road, because
Okay.
that one I walked a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Okay. Couple of 3 when I came in, and, but that's the one I thought you were speaking of, Derick, the one we've got on the board, and there was a lot of erosion down in the low point down around here.
Yep.
That is quite a wet area. To me, those are tight glacial tills. Difficult to infiltrate much water into. The rates we use, there's some tabulated rates that the state uses under the stormwater handbook now. They're in what's called the RAWLS table, RAWLS. To me, they're conservatively slow, but it's what we designed from. I've got a municipal client down in southeastern Mass, and they used to like to do borehole permeability testing instead of just some simple inexpensive testing. You'd have to bring a drill rig out, drill like a 10 or 15 foot hole and apply water to it.
An old perk test.
This is the,
Yeah,
no,
but it's
yeah,
a
this
perk
is,
test.
it's actually,
What everybody has to do, you're just
Yeah.
doing it a little more expensive.
yeah, they're trying to do permeability testing, which
Right.
is, unlike perk tests, they're trying to look at saturated conditions, but the point is, it's an expensive endeavor. And it was getting, especially in sands and gravels, it was getting rates that were just phenomenally higher than the tabulated rates. But again, those are sands and gravels, not tilts. The point is, those RAWLS rates that we use by default, unless somebody wants to spend the money to do this extra testing, they're conservatively slow, which is good. But nevertheless, when you're talking glacial tills compared to sands and gravels, you're talking at least an order of magnitude slower as far as gallons per day per square foot. Slow rates is what I'm getting at. A lot of money spent on a lot of effort, not to get as much as infiltration as we'd like. If you ever have a sand and gravel site, let's rethink that, because I think you'd be more successful in a sand and gravel type of site.
Thank you, Jeff.
You're welcome.
Jeff, how do you figure out the compactability of soil once it's been cleared? You've got trees, you've got growth, you've got foliage that's fallen, you've got everything over the bazillion of years to develop the soils.
Yeah.
The soils have different layers. Okay, you have a forested area that now is cleared. We're gonna grade it out.
Yep.
Boulders eventually and rocks, based on where you are building, or, excuse me, where you're clearing, over the years, the soils will compact because you have nothing fertile on top anymore. You have no regeneration of the soil. It's been moved and taken away.
Yeah.
Okay, a lot of it has just been graded out and compacted. Now you're putting grass on it that has a diffuse root system, but only about 2
4
inches.
inches.
4
2
inches, depending on what you put down.
Sure.
Right, you got 4 inches.
Yep.
After that, the soil is stagnant. You've got water running on it for years and sun bleach,
Yep, yep.
okay?
Mhm.
So now that soil becomes harder and harder. We have no records that can be found any place, based on what's going on today, of what the soil will look at 20 years from now, 15 years from now. But it's gonna have grass. Oh, we're all gonna have grass, and we'll maintain it, right up until the day. Other than that, with the soil being compacted, not used and bleached and blanched out, Coy Hill, boulders will start to rise at times. Rocks will shift. We have water on Coy Hill now that has changed, okay, because of the racetrack, and it's been proven. When they blasted and blew the racetrack over in Palmer.
So I'm not familiar with that.
Alright, we've got families on the backside of Coy Hill Road, Town Farm Road, and up top,
Okay.
that have, their water pressures have shifted. Okay, and they've been the same since Coy Hill was Coy Hill, with these families. And with the event of the pressures being pushed down consistently, all the time, right? Ground is being pushed down because it's sitting there, water's running off it now, it's not penetrating it, it's not making fissures so that the larger rocks can break up over the time frame to make smaller, to make the gravels or anything else. You have no nutrients in the soil whatsoever, which is a natural regeneration. The right side of Coy Hill, from Reynolds Road up, was all harvested for the wood to build all the barns in this area. Fact and history.
All right.
The left side of Coy Hill, all the way to the top, Goldberg's property, which is at the turnaround, okay?
Yep.
That road you took to the right was paved 45 years ago. All right, that was a paved road to come up Cutler Road.
Okay.
Fact and history. And the property to the right, which is the wildlife management area, goes all the way through to Janine's, which is a restaurant on Route 9 in Ware, right
Okay.
across from the intersection of 32.
All right.
That whole side was deforested. Okay? That was exactly fields. The May Farm was up there, Shuttleworth Farm was up there at the top of the hill into Goldberg's property, right, where the management area is. All right, that was all pasture, all the way down to Reynolds Road. One side was forested,
Yeah.
where the dairy farm is, the Richardson's farm, which is up further. That has always been a farm, a dairy farm. There were 3 dairy farms up there. 2 have gone, Shuttleworth and May. All right, and that's past the Red Towers, a third of the way down. History. And it was all pasture. Fact, over where Lucy Stone's foundations are, which is, had you gone down, all the way down,
Okay.
well, come up, you had foundation. Lucy Stone Park is right there.
Okay.
The foundation's for her farm, all right?
If I came in on Route 9,
Route
before
9,
I
you
took
took
a
a left
left,
to come up.
there was some old
Thank you, that's
foundation.
Lucy Stone.
Oh, okay,
Okay.
okay, yep.
That's all history.
Okay.
And then when you take a right on Beaman Road, there's three, I think it is, foundations in there too,
Okay.
which were part of the settlement and/or farms and buildings, all right? So with that, the old Indians used to come up the top in the, not the French and Indian War, I forget it right now. But right now, the Indians came up to the top of the Coy Hill, all right? From the pastures, smoke signals were sent to those in Palmer, which went all the way down into Munson into the river. All the fur trade and everything else went down that hill. So that's always been grass on that side of the hill. That's all history, it's in a book a fellow wrote from Munson, all about this, all right? With that, we have two different types of soils up there. You got the right-hand side going up, which all had diffused root systems. Not many of the trees of that species, the deciduous trees, had tap roots.
Okay.
They all had diffused roots, all right? You have a few pine trees and stuff in there, but there was nothing, it was all hardwood. On the left-hand side, you have all pasture. The left-hand side going up, and Goldberg's property is clay and hardpack.
Yep.
Water don't run off Coy Hill, is what I was told when I moved into town. It don't run off Coy Hill, it sits right on there. All right? On the right-hand side, it all moves. It all drains out, it all comes down to the little creek behind John Lezak's house, fella that owns the bus company.
Oh, okay, yep.
As you take the right off 67, go up. You take a right, you go up, and he's got a little barn there, and he's got his house, that's John Lezak. Up behind him is beaver ponds and marsh. And that little creek, prior to, as you go by Alltown, runs all the way down. You got the Richardson's lower pasture, which is up behind the property, on the map, right there, on the north end. Okay, northeast side. You got the Richardson's property up there. Their lower pasture is soaking wet. It's one of the last pastures in late summer, well, early summer when it's dry, when we have the, when we don't get the rains. They'll go down there and cut it. The pastures on the right-hand side going up Coy Hill, the way that ground drains, prior to the project line, you'll see the line which is running north and south,
Yep.
the length of the project. Those two pastures, you can sink the tractor in year-round, okay? Water is continually running down through there, continually. So with the changing and the types of soils on both sides, you're getting more water running. Going back to the beginning, the compactability of the soil, and as we saw with Sinkafa, and Sinkafa made these changes to adjust to the water. Remember, we all talked about that, enlarging their swales, all right, and how the water was gonna come down, and then it funnels down to the low point, which would be the south end, behind the Beaudry's house, okay? They've changed all that to adjust that water flow. So anything coming off a project on the right-hand side is gonna increase no matter what goes on once that soil becomes compacted off that property inside a fence and start to flow with a greater velocity at certain times of the year. Am I right or wrong?
I apologize, but I'm a little confused right now.
Okay.
So I don't wanna give you an answer, because I'm
Yeah.
not quite sure what I'm answering. Okay.
Okay, what I'm looking for is the right-hand side of right-hand side of Coy Hill going up. Richardson's from where the slope starts to come down, above Richardson's property, okay? When it's a little level, then it comes down. We're coming south, north to south. We're coming down the hill.
All right.
All right, their lower pastures coming south are constantly wet. And the pastures
Bleeding out water.
constantly.
Okay, okay.
All right.
I just wanna make sure we're talking
Right.
groundwater seeps
Right.
or surface water
And then you
flow.
have
or-
the two lower pastures, we're looking at the length. Coy Hill runs north and south. You've got a little red dot I see.
Yep, on the
Right,
left.
right
I see
across,
it.
those are pastures right in there.
Okay,
They're soaking wet on the south end.
yep.
All right, Bobby gets down there and tries to spin the tractor around. Over the years, it's been a lot of fun pulling everybody out of there with him.
Okay.
With the soil, and that's with forest there. When you take away a forest, you're taking away natural water absorption and water flow, and you're gonna change everything, right?
Well, taking away forest from the hydrology model.
Yeah,
that we
okay.
were- when rainfall
Yep.
comes out of the sky, it gets absorbed into it gets stored in puddles, gets absorbed into the soil, gets caught on vegetation and such, and may not even make it to the ground, leaves of trees or what have you. All those together are collectively called abstraction.
Right.
When you get more rainfall hitting the ground than abstraction, the difference becomes runoff,
Right.
surface runoff. And where I'm going with this is you're absolutely right, the forests create much more abstraction than lawns, certainly more abstraction than pavement. That's why when I see a solar project come in and they wanna cut a lot of trees and replace it with the grass, which is the equivalent of pasture,
Mhm.
from a hydrology modeling, there's less abstraction with the pasture than there is with trees. So and hence, the rates of runoff and volumes of runoff go up, and that's why they start creating the ponds and all that to temporarily attenuate. As far as compaction and such goes, there's nothing in the methods that we use currently as engineers to address that.
Because we don't have a follow-up to it. We don't have experience with that. When you go to Harvard Forest on Route 32, Petersham,
Okay, sorry, I'm not familiar with it.
okay, that's what they use for study of all this, hydrology and everything
I've
else,
heard
right
of
up
that,
there.
okay.
Harvard Forest, right on 32, outside Hardwick on the right-hand side.
Okay.
Been there. With that, the studies they're showing, or have shown over years, rock by rock, a book written about this area.
Okay.
I think it was 1835, Harvard Forest was doing a study on soil already there. And with that, they talk about what Sincarfa had alluded to and then agreed upon. When property land was cleared and it went to pasture, the drainage of the swales were always bigger on one side, that what I call the slope side, okay, high ground, low ground. From high to low, Sincarfa, larger swales on the side that the water was prominently coming down to where we have the abutters.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm getting there. With the abutters. Then they changed the size of their,
basin,
thank you,
yep,
basins, I
yep,
would say,
yep.
retention ponds. They changed the sizes to accommodate that, so when the water does come into them, it has a slower velocity going out, am I correct?
That is correct. The reason, and what they did is they enlarged the footprint, and in their hydrology model, they did some soil testing out there to make sure they were above the groundwater.
Right.
So therefore, in their hydrology model, they included what we call exfiltration, which they tried to represent a rate going into the ground using those rates that I talked about earlier
Right.
from the Rawls table. And they enlarged the footprint to create more square footage to try to get more infiltration to occur.
Right,
They were pretty close to begin with when they had a detention basin
yeah, they did, yeah.
without any exfiltration modeled. But because they were close, they saw that they could go through the exercise that we just discussed and actually mathematically show that, in theory, they can achieve what the board had asked them to achieve. Yep.
And that is what everybody has to look at when it comes down to that. When it leaves, and anybody, I mean, there's two, and then on the opposite side, 3, all on slope grounds.
Yep.
When you start looking at that, once it leaves the confine, and once it changes the compactability, what I call the compactability of the soil, you're increasing the flow of water. You can have science say this and that happens. There is no proof. There is no FDA 20 years that we've been trying this one pill that proves that everything, you're not gonna have to take 5 other pills to alleviate things. These things are going in. You look at the one on 32, 9 to 32, heading west. You take the right-hand corner. You wanna see a system that's set up with drainage that is just mind-boggling. It's right at the, as you're heading into Hardwick.
Okay.
It's mind-boggling. It's all this way and that way. And
Okay.
I'm not picking on the solar company, I'm just saying that the drainage is what everybody has to look at, and the effects later. We see it present. We see it present. You're looking at it now using, and I questioned some people about the federal standard soils. Well, they were taken a long time ago. They're not taken too often, are they? When you look at the book and you read them, they go back almost 75 to 100 years.
Sure, but they certainly can be
They can be
made
tweaked.
site-specific by doing on-site testing. to
Yes, and how
confirm.
often is that done? Only by the engineer who is going to look at that property. Or who is hired by the federal government as a surveyor to go out and survey certain areas within, so we can look at the standards again. Okay, and get a ratio after the 75 years of the last time we did it. And those are the things that you gotta look at and question. What happens with it all down the road? There isn't anybody in these rooms that come in here that is gonna be local in 25 years. Maybe me, and that's my ashes, because I know where they're going, okay?
Yeah.
But that's where I'll be,
Yeah.
all right? But Jeff will probably be in a nice retirement place, okay? Somebody
Hopefully it'll
else
be
is
above
gonna
the
have
ground
to
by then,
look
but
at
who
it.
knows?
Yeah, everybody
Nah,
else
it's gonna be
is gonna
close.
have to look at all this. And are we building steps? Are we building records to show what happens? Down the road, these panels last forever, or they're interchangeable. We agree, no problems, all right? Is it gonna last forever? There isn't a person that can say yes or no.
Agreed.
There isn't a person in this room that's gonna be back here in 15 years to see what the water's doing, to see what has happened down the road. It's not gonna be the same person. Might be the kid who's hired to mow the lawn, or the robot that goes in and mows the lawn now, because that's where we're going, all right? What are the effects overall?
You bring up some good points, but I can say, I think what you're talking about, certainly valid, but I see that more being a research endeavor,
Yeah.
and which, once the researchers come up with, this is how we want to deal with it, then the challenge is to put it into standard use.
Right,
And the case in point is the hydrology that we use. The hydrology we follow was developed by the federal government hired someone, put out an organization to do it. We use what's called TR20, Technical Release 20, and Technical Release 55. The point is, it's surface water hydrology.
right.
It tries to account for that abstraction into the soil and onto the plants by using runoff curve numbers and such. But again, it's surface water hydrology. It doesn't get into groundwater flow. So it might be an apples and oranges comparison to some extent. It's not it's a valid thing to talk about, but the point is my bigger concern with long term is if I've got somebody who's modeling good soils and they decide to import 5 feet of fill and cover those good soils with a lousy soil that doesn't infiltrate as much, to me, that has a big impact on surface water hydrology, because these runoff curve numbers we use are in fact part of what they are based upon in the soils that the site is being built upon.
It's just interesting when you get into it all, because you have, your groundwater, which we all have to look at if you're building or you're buying a piece of property, perk test and stuff. And then you look at, some people will take certain samples to look at it, and consistency, what it's all made up with. But thanks for listening to me. I enjoy it. All right, what I'd like to do, call the meeting back to order again, not that we went out of it, but this time it's for a 8:30, continuing the public hearing, special permit 289, site plan 57 for ZBT Energy Solutions. The applicant is requesting a 3.0 megawatt ground-mounted solar energy facility on the property on Reed Street, Goyette's property, correct, Kat?
Yes.
Goyette's property. All right, Sue, it's
Yeah.
yours.
have another one of the engraves to go over the links?
Yes, I did not receive a copy of it today. If it'd be acceptable for Jeff to go through the list?
Be glad to. Put my things together here.
I don't have one else.
Kathy, you did receive the letter? Okay, great. I only have
You
one
should have-
copy,
You should have one.
so I'm not able to share with the applicant.
Let me go copy it at some point.
That'd be great, thank you. I just read along.
Give me a second.
2 copies if you can. I guess as we're waiting for Kathy, I'll just reintroduce myself. Adam Christie from ZPT Energy Solutions. And as stated earlier, this is Dan Delaney from Fuss & O'Neill.
For the record, my name is Jeff Walsh. I'm with Graves Engineering from Worcester. Planning Board's consulting engineer. We issued a letter late this afternoon. I apologize for both projects for getting the letters out late, but I was glad to get them out before the meeting just so we could have something to speak about. I'd rather not go through every point on our letter, but if you don't mind, I'd like to just touch on the things that I'd like to have some discussion with the board, and I'd certainly be glad to go back and answer questions for any of the comments at all. But if I could go on to start with number 2. Very simply, I don't anticipate that there'd be parking or unloading from Reed Street, but nevertheless, there seems, my recollection of the Reed Street project from a few years ago, when it was being, the property was being proposed for something else, and I visited the site. I was a little concerned back then about, not that I saw a lot of heavy traffic, but it just didn't seem to be a street conducive for parking trailer trucks or even passenger vehicles on one side when staff comes in to work. The project itself is removed quite a ways from Reed Street, so I anticipate there'd be not much of a desire for anybody to park their vehicle there, but nonetheless, it wouldn't be a bad idea for the planning board to have a condition that there's no unloading or parking of employee vehicles on Reed Street. Just like to see that the plans call out a place to park and unload somewhere else. Pretty simple one. Basically, I'm suggesting a condition of approval. If I could move on to number 6, this has to do with the requirement for 150 feet of vegetative buffer. I believe the intention of the plans is to honor that requirement, but I saw a couple of discrepancies that if I were a contractor, and depending on which sheet I looked at, and I took the trees down based on the sheet I should have been following, I just wouldn't want to see that happen. The short of it is, the detailed sheets at 40 scale showed 150-foot buffer, but one of the overall sheets showed less than 150-foot buffer, and a construction detail in the back of the drawings, I think, was more of a generic note on it, but nevertheless, it said it will maintain a 50-foot buffer. I don't want to put the applicant's team on the spot, so I just say that there's an inconsistency, but I do feel they're trying to honor that 150-foot buffer requirement, and if they're not, I'd like to hear, I'd like to discuss it in greater detail, but otherwise, I think there's a couple of things that need to be changed on the plan to make sure all the sheets reflect the 150-foot buffer.
So can I address that?
Yeah.
So our intention is to maintain that 150-foot vegetative buffer per the new bylaw. And in doing so, since it states, the bylaw doesn't state 150-foot no clearing zone, it says vegetative buffer. So because of the shading and what I'm sure every solar developer has said, when they come in here regarding feathering the tree back for shading and not needing to clear cut. Essentially, that's what we're proposing, and I can find the detail, I'll show you our intent. Should be towards the end. One of these days I'll find it. Actually, Dan, I don't see it up
Is it
here.
on this, we have 2 sets of plans?
Those were the renderings that we presented at the last one.
Is that in with the renderings? Okay, all right.
So I apologize, I don't believe we have it here. But essentially that 150 foot, probably just quickly. So essentially our detail is, say that's your 150 feet, here's your fence line over here. Your property line, you know, the scale's not very good, but essentially you've got your no clear, and then you've got your feather back. I'll tell you the exact dimensions. So there's 0 disturbance within the first 50 feet from the property line over, and then from the 50 to 150 foot out, so essentially 100 feet from the edge, we've got the vegetative buffer that's going to be feathered back, allowing for that natural vegetative buffer to remain here. So that's our intent, is to feather it. Seeing as that the 150 foot no clear wasn't the intent of the bylaw, so that's what we're really trying to do here. And if there's any clarifications or inconsistencies on the plan from one sheet to another, we'll address that. And that's on sheet CD-505, for those of you that may have a copy with you.
And where I say inconsistency, when I looked at sheet CP 103, for example, I see a tree line, which I took to be a proposed tree line, that measures exactly 150 feet from the property line. So my interpretation there was that the intention was to maintain 150 feet of no clearing.
Right.
But I misunderstood. I understand your point about feathering. So this is a good point for discussion, is to make sure we're all on the same page as what's being proposed, and then talk about whether it's acceptable to the planning board.
What is the feathering? Just,
It's selective based on the height of the trees. If you got
oh,
like,
okay.
if you have like a 120 foot pine, obviously you identify that one.
Yeah.
But obviously only within that 100 foot that we've
Yeah.
determined in the detail as selective trimming. And then that last 50 feet is, we're proposed obviously is no clear cut, no disturbance
Right.
at all. And all the existing undergrowth and a lot of what creates the visual barrier for someone will ultimately remain, with the exception of the very large trees that would cause shading.
Okay.
I hadn't seen that approach before, but I understand the reasoning behind it. I understand the explanation.
I think the intent was not only visually, but to protect the water and the soil, I think the intent is not only for visuals, it's to protect what it is there now.
And the understory is not going to change, so it's not going to have an impact on the hydrology.
What's your take on it, Jeff?
This is a new one to me. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's just, what I understand is if the solar panels are here, in the area that they're talking of feathering, taller trees are removed, almost medium-sized and tall trees, if you will, are removed closer to the panels, and as you get farther away from the panels, you can leave taller trees until they get to the the last 50 feet to the property line, which everything stays. The point being is the sun can come down and get to the panels. I understand that's their intention. Now the challenge is to try to understand whether it complies with the bylaw or not. That's the challenge I'm having.
And then it says 100 feet for everything that is 15 feet above.
And I'm gonna look for that bylaw section.
Yeah, so within 150 feet, there it is, I don't know.
Which I think is just the purpose of the bylaw. We can condition that, right?
Yeah, I think personally, I think that the 150-foot buffer is a no clear, no cut, 150-foot buffer. That would be my interpretation, and from having the public hearings and listening to the people that we, design that around, that's what they're looking for too. So I'm not sure that I agree with this tapering type cutting, move your panels over, away from the shading. You got plenty of property up there. But on the residential side, it's my opinion that you'll have to maintain 150 feet and there'll be no cutting of any trees. That's just my opinion. I'm not the board, I speak for myself.
I mean, with that being said, interpretations of it being 150 foot, no clear versus it reads as 150 foot vegetative buffer. With the visuals that were presented at the last meeting, knowing that, yes, you do have Brimfield Road on that side, and everything that's been presented shows that no one will ever see this. And what we're doing, even if we had zero clear cut, no one's gonna see it. I understand that you're referencing drainage and the impacts on the surface, everything like that. From a visual standpoint, if we go 150 or 0, it's not gonna have an impact because of the siting of this project. In regards to hydrology, it's our opinion that there's going to be no negative impact with what we're proposing versus keeping that 150 foot. I understand your issue with if there's 50, 60 trees, those are gonna come down. It's a mature forest. There's not gonna be that much, dense, very large trees to come down like that in that 100-foot buffer. It's going to be a lot less than possibly what you discussed. That's really our interpretation of the vegetative buffer. Seeing as the bylaw doesn't say no logging, and because of the site, we felt that this was something the board may be in favor of versus implying a no logging, which, the bylaw is up for interpretation because it doesn't say that. So I'm just presenting that to see if that's a dialogue we can have, or if, the no logging is where everyone stands. I just think with this site, what we've provided is not gonna have a negative impact whatsoever. From a drainage standpoint, visual standpoint.
Yeah? I believe that if that is your intention, then you should submit an application for waiver to the board. And that the board could take that up as a condition, if the board so feels that way, or feels the way I feel. See, we've not given a waiver to anybody on the buffer unless they've come to terms with the abutter that they're looking to infringe upon. Okay, so you could certainly go that route too. But I would suggest that if you wanna cut selective trees down for shading in the manner that you just presented to us in the 100 feet from, the 100 feet from the site, that you submit that to us in a waiver. And then the board can take it up as a waiver. But for me, I would like to just, at this point, apply the bylaw. And the bylaw, although it may not say no logging, being through the public hearings and listening to the townsfolk and why we did it, the interpretation was to have that 150 foot of untouched buffer. We could certainly, revamp the bylaws. It's given me some ideas for when our next town meeting comes up, of things that we may need to do to make our bylaws more clear in our intentions. But that's the way I think that it should be handled at this point. And then, you know, the board can vote, and if they give you the waiver, or they wanna give you the waiver, then you're all set. And if not, it'll go from there.
Also, if we had a number, an idea of how many trees you're talking. Right,
That's hard to prove. I'd rather see the waiver.
yeah.
I have full.
Next,
Okay. Well, we got the discussion underway, that was the driving force behind the comment. Moving on, number 8, there was, just one of the basins, there was some inconsistencies we had when we double-checked the hydrology, and, there's certainly something that can be addressed. If anything, the modeling on this particular project here, the inconsistencies were a conservative approach. So just for the record, it needs to be corrected, is my point. In this case, I think if I remember right, the basins were modeled to be smaller than what they actually are on the plan. But not earth-shattering, but the point is, if the model is addressed, it shouldn't be an issue, but just for the record.
One should match the other.
Exactly. Reasonably close. We don't use a planimeter, we don't use digitizing to get the areas. To be efficient, we just try to make a good estimate and make sure they're reasonably close. The same thing for number 10. And, number 9, as far as stormwater goes, I look for an engineer's stamp either on the cover of the report or on the checklist where there is a place for the engineer's stamp, and it just happened to be in either case. Nevertheless, that's an easy one. Moving on to number 11, it's a long ways into the project. In a case like that, I usually look for a turnaround outside the gated area, and I can't require it, I'm suggesting it, and the reason I do that is that I like to let the emergency services department speak for what they need. Every town's different, their emergency services, how they want to attack things, or have access, maximum grades, width, so on and so forth. Well, my thinking is there might be times where there's an emergency call, they have to get in the gate, there's a turnaround in the gate, within the gated area, because there's always a turnaround at the inverters and where the operators of the facility have to get to the equipment. But thinking that, okay, somebody's got a call out there, whether it's an ambulance, police car, or even a pumper engine, if they only come to the gate and they don't have to go any farther, I like to see them be able to turn around and get back out of there without having to open the gate. That's what it comes down to, guys. Just a suggestion.
Done.
Okay, I won't belabor the point.
Actually, a good thought, being that
60
it's
foot of
so
gravel.
far in
Yeah.
the property.
And sometimes you have site-specific conditions, wetlands, topography, what have you. You might have to adjust the location a little bit, but,
no.
all right. Moving on. Number 13 is the decommissioning plan. I know we talked about it the last time, and nevertheless, I'd be looking for the cost and inflation and so on and so forth when the board wants me to look at it, whether it's during the public hearing process or not. Nice thing about during the public hearing process is the board's able to take testimony from both the applicant and myself versus once the public hearing is closed. That's it.
All right. Does anyone else have any other concerns?
No, I think we
Has
should be
the
able to
fire
do that.
department received these?
Oh, yeah.
We've got no response from, I don't remember, I can go through the file real quick.
And he usually looks through it, and he lets us know if there's any issues.
Yeah, because he went through the other one up there and
Right.
made turnarounds and everything that he
I don't
wanted.
remember anything on this one.
If we continue this one, do we have to put a time or can we say immediately following?
No, you gotta put a time for the public.
How about we put 8 o'clock?
Put them both at the same
Be a
time?
half hour.
15 minutes.
Put them both,
Jeff has a good idea.
put them both at the same time?
You
Because
can stagger them like 5 minutes.
could stagger them 5 minutes. The point is, if people arrive and you're not ready for them, they're here to hear the public hearing.
Mhm.
Otherwise, just like tonight, you gotta wait for time.
Yeah,
Or if you wanna do like the city of Worcester, everybody gets 5:30. And they stack them all up, and it's a full room at the beginning of the night.
Huh.
I wouldn't recommend it, but
Up to the board. I'll do whatever you tell me to.
What do you think?
7:45.
7:30 and 7:45? Yeah.
45
If we
minutes?
have to.
No, that's 15 minutes. 7:30 and
Yeah, I
7:45.
just,
50,
I was thinking,
yeah.
We can go 8 o'clock, half an hour.
that's what we did the last one, 7:30 and 8.
Yeah, and then we can do our other stuff in between if we
Mhm.
need to. Okay,
7:30 and 8.
okay.
What date?
25th.
Oh, yeah, we
But
just
I
did
already
that the
put
last
7:30.
time, same place.
Yeah,
That's right.
That's what,
I have to put it
Ahead
on
of
when
you
it's already
guys.
there.
yeah, that's why I said, because it's the same
All
people,
right.
instead of waiting. All right, is there a motion to continue this hearing until?
Madam Chairman,
Yes?
before you make a motion, can I just make a comment on
Sure.
this project? Seeing as this project, with everything we've gone through and obviously the history with this site, I believe everybody here agrees that this is a very good project and the site location for it. And unlike a lot of some of the other projects, we already have sort of everything we need to file with the program with the exception of the special permit. And with the end of the program, with everything filling up, I was just curious if there was any way that the board, knowing that more than likely you are in favor of this, and with going through the process with Jeff, that'll get wrapped up fairly easily, and if submitting a waiver for that 150 foot and further discussion and vote, if it were possible at that next meeting to have everything wrapped up, if there are no other outstanding items with this board for this. Fairly straightforward project.
Be a vote, I think that we would probably close the hearing.
Okay, because I know
can't say.
5 weeks ago, we were hoping that tonight would be, and we started this process a few meetings ago. I was wondering if there was any way that, if that was a possibility or not. I have to ask.
I mean, I think it's possible.
Could be, because this one is easier than the other one.
Still need time to do it.
Still need time to do the decision.
And I'll ask one more question. This is two separate applications, one's for special permit, one's for site plan review. I would have to feel that the use isn't in question for this particular site. Has this board ever closed and voted on one and issued a decision for each application separately, or has it always been done at the same time?
Same time. 'cause
I
it's-
can't answer that, I've only been on the board 2 years, so,
Yeah, but we didn't have it before,
yeah,
so you've been here as long as it's been here.
well, then it's always been the same time.
Yeah,
Okay, well, I had to ask.
yeah. I don't think we've done it separate.
Well, Heels, like they had site and special permit, were done together.
They were done together.
Yeah. I know in other towns we've had it done separately, but obviously it's the discretion of the board and how they handle things. So I thought I would just ask, because of this project, try to get one wrapped up, but
Oh, I
With
know.
this project where it is and the way it is, I don't have any problem working with you to the best of my ability to get it through for you. But not cutting corners, so we
Correct.
wanna hear from Graves Engineering, make sure we've got the right plans, so that the right plans are out at the site, and there's no discrepancies on basin
Absolutely.
sizes and
Absolutely.
all of this stuff. And to,
And
I think it would behoove you to talk to the landowners about that buffer side, it's only 2 properties, right?
yes, we've sent them letters, we haven't heard from them, and
I might try to reach out and get them, because, anything that
They've
you
been
can.
notified too of the public
Yeah.
hearings.
Right, anything that, when it comes to a buffer, an application for a waiver, I mean, personally, I like to hear from the abutters and know how they feel about it. I mean, but I agree with what you're saying, though, this thing's so far out of sight, I mean, you could cut right up to the line and no one's gonna see it.
I mean, essentially, if we move the system over, we're not gonna clear cut at that 150 and then move it, we're gonna then feather it anyways. So are we feathering here, are we feathering a little bit there, still maintaining that? And as far as everything that you've addressed with getting all that stuff taken care of with Graves, essentially that would, for the most part, everything that is outstanding would fall under site plan review.
Right.
Which is why I'm asking that question. you know, if we were able, not that it's gonna happen, but if we were able to, if there was a possibility of closing that tonight and voting for the use on the special permit. But if that's something the town isn't willing to do tonight or at the next meeting, I have to throw it out there knowing that I believe everybody on this board is in favor of the special permit use for this site. And that's just,
Kathy, I don't disagree with you.
Yeah.
and I don't want to push. I know we've been very accommodating with the process on this project, but if anybody were to make a motion, I would not be against that for the special permit. But that's the last of my
Great.
begging.
Okay. What does everyone think?
I'll make the motion, Madam Chairman, that we continue this hearing until the 25th.
Mhm.
Is that what it was? At 7:30? That's the only motion I'll make at this time.
Okay. No, it
At
wasn't
what?
8 o'clock.
8 o'clock?
What was it? Yeah.
Or 7:30?
7:40,
The other was
7:45.
7:30.
7:45 and 8 o'clock. That's my fault, Madam Chair.
Yeah, okay. Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
Thank you very much for your time.
That's it.
That concludes the two public hearings for this evening. Everything else on the agenda.
Thank you. Good seeing you again.
Good to see you getting out of it, yes. Sorry to get the names all messed up, but I do remember Dan.
Jeff, thanks.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Everyone else, appreciate the work.
With others, and believe, and, thanks for all the work for coming on these good too. Is there a motion by the Kathy, do you have anything?
I gave you everything to take home and review.
If you,
What did you give me?
The two decisions I put in there to start looking over for me.
I got the one that Copper wrote, but I didn't see
I know we have.
Yeah, there's one in there.
We're all in agreement with, so I
Oh, the
don't see
Borrego
why-
one.
Yeah.
Well, and I
Look
get
those
my
over
motion out
next
fast.
meeting.
Kathy, wait a minute, let everybody hear this. Are you two satisfied right now? Kathy, you're talking to Bob.
Yeah, I got it.
All
Thank
right,
you, Bill.
Melissa has a question. So,
If we're all in agreement, I don't see why we can't, I didn't get my motion out quick enough, but why we couldn't close on this issue. I know we haven't done it before, but this is fairly new to this procedure. And it's only about the use, correct?
Yes, that's for the.
It's not the site plan or the conditions, it's just the use, and we're all seemingly in favor. But I'll speak for everybody, but I would like to propose that we take another vote.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
we haven't
we have the
adjourned
decision
yet.
right
wait a minute, we've got two things here. No, we have not. Say again, Kathy?
For the
We have
special
to get-
permit,
Yeah.
and so timeframe wise, is that not gonna happen?
Not the
not-
next meeting.
The
I
two
mean, I
things,
could
the
try.
two things the board has to remember, if we split anything, you set a precedent. If you split anything, you're locked into a time frame that is now double. And by that I mean you have one for a special permit that you're gonna try to get done within the next 20 days. And then at the same time, this one's left open. All right? So what are you gonna grant them to do with the special permit?
I would
What are you gonna grant them on the special permit?
just, you're just okay in the use.
You're still paying the use.
Just okay on the use, all right?
But, yeah, but.
Everything, the intent, now someone's gonna call legal, that's fine. The intent is do everything together.
Right.
Get the site plan done, get it agreed upon, get all the facts together. You close the meeting, you don't vote on it. You get it like we have coming up, we can sit down and talk about Sincarfa or anybody else, and I'm picking on Sincarfa because that's the one that's just done. Or in the past. And when we didn't have the special permit. You closed it, and then you got all the ideas together on the order condition, looked at everything, everything's final, because you closed it. Then you come back, you discuss it, then you vote on it, then it's definitely be done, and then the time frame begins. We've got 9 projects. If you people want to confuse 9 projects,
Split
and
'em
go
up.
down and look at that filing cabinet down there, I will not
Please don't.
stop you all with a majority vote,
Yeah.
okay? It's up to the majority. But by gosh, you gotta think of the timeframes. And you wanna be held to timeframes, and you said, and we've said, we're gonna have to meet more often. Well, boys, start thinking about 2 or 3 nights a week to get all these timeframes. I have 1 woman I'm responsible for, you have 4, you are responsible for her also, me more. Yet, to get that work done, the office is closed on Tuesdays
Yeah.
for town work,
Yeah.
and that's behind. And with the phone calls, the emails, and everybody wants this then, and changing the subject, you got a plan, stay with it. I agree with Melissa, it's a good idea. Yet, where do you go with it? It's up to you. I'm out of these 2, so you 2 figure it, you 4 figure it out.
I would personally rather meet on the 25th, and if
Do everything at once.
if it works out, close it and vote on it all on the same night.
But you gotta count your days before you do
Count
it.
the days.
Have
So,
Kathy bring in a
work with
calendar, and you
Kathy.
start counting days,
Yeah.
because you're working on 2 which overlap.
Right. I think Reed Street is one that can close out pretty fast, so, I mean, I'd like to help them out and close it out as fast as we can.
Yeah.
Pick your days though,
But
90
we're gonna
days,
talk-
as soon as you
Well,
close
this
it.
is why I
the clock's
continued it
ticking.
to 25th, so we can talk to Kathy and find out, okay,
That's
can we
fine.
make that work on the 25th? And if not, how soon after can we?
The applicant's gotta understand too, they know the time
Oh,
days,
yeah.
every one of these people do.
Well, the
And
applicants
when you
now,
got, and they know we all got projects, every town does.
Right.
And you're not gonna get confused in doing it, because the town cannot afford the legal part.
No.
And we all know that, okay?
but I understand on their part too, that the
I do
smart
too.
plan is running out,
Yeah.
and the megawatts are being chewed up, and everybody needs to get their places, shovel ready to get in on it, and so, I mean, I don't mind, trying to move along projects that are
Without a
so
doubt.
isolated and so well-positioned that it's really not gonna affect anything that's
Oh, we
going on out
can
there.
see, no one showed up. All
Right.
our other solar
There's
hearings.
only 2
Right.
at the button.
Right, the place was
Right.
packed.
But it's Reed Street too, and normally when you
Normally
say
Reed
Reed
Street-
Street
Oh,
and
yeah.
something's happening,
Reed Street's a
60 people show
pouring
up.
salt in
Right.
the wound.
You know,
Yeah. if they
so
agree
the
with
fact that they're not here tells me
Yeah.
that, I mean, and I've had dozens of neighbors drop by the house, the Downings and Perkins and so forth, asking about what's going on, and they could, they're not, to be honest with you, I can't see it, I don't care what he does up there. That's really the answer I get. I can't see it, I don't care what he does up there.
So do you wanna just continue to the 25th?
To the 25th, yes.
And then talk to Kathy, you all gotta talk to
We
Kathy.
can
gotta
close
come up
it,
with a
and if the
decision at
board
that
is,
time.
Yeah.
is appeased, and we can close it and vote on it the 25th, I'm more than willing to do that.
If you're wishing to, okay, is that all right, boys?
Yep.
With that discussion?
But you just need to let us know what your timeline is.
Well, yes, I need time to do this decision, I have 2 before this one, so.
Best I can do.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
I'll try my
Thank you
best,
for-
but I got 12 hours a week.
Alrighty, with
That's all I
that,
got.
anything else? You got, Bob, you and Kathy got, ironed out? We were talking about something.
Some paper or something, well, I don't know.
All right. Any further from anybody? Comments and concerns? All right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Motion made, second. All in favor?
All right.
Aye.
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 Aye.